Good morning. I'd like to start with a little bit of prophecy in Daniel, and then I'll go on to a story concerning Daniel and his three friends. So, Daniel 11 and verse 40. The King James Bible reads, "And at the time of the end." Watchtower's Bible says, "in the time of the end." Now, does it matter? Well, it affects the interpretation. So which one is right? Is it at the very end or during the time of the end? Well, the commentaries lead us to verse 35 of the same chapter. Now, this is talking about some persecution, which Watchtower interprets as happening during the Second World War, which it might well have done. But it says this at the end, "The righteous will be purged, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for the appointed time is still to come." What time is that? Well, in verse 40, it says, "at the time of the end." So this could be referring to the very end. So what does it say? It says in the Jerusalem Bible that the king of the south will try conclusions with the king of the north. But the king of the north will come storming down on him with chariots, cavalry, and a large fleet. He will invade countries. So it seems that the king of the south will try diplomatic solutions, but the king of the north will invade countries. Is that going to happen? Well, I can't say for certain, but I'd like us to be prepared so that we're not too worried if certain events that are surrounding Europe's borders at the moment actually come to their end. Why shouldn't we be frightened? Well, it goes on and says this about the king of the north: "He will hear reports coming from the east and the north. They will worry him, and in great fury he will set out to bring ruin," and so on. "But he will pitch his tents between the sea and the mountains of the holy splendor." In other words, he's going to persecute Christians. Now, Mark Martin has done a very nice video about persecution of all types of Christians in Russia. I'll put a link below. It's well worth looking at. So what happens to the king of the north? It says he comes to his end. Now, it might be frightening because as it goes on in chapter 12, there is going to be a time of great distress. So it could be frightening. So how do we cope? Go back to Daniel chapter 2. And here we have Daniel and his three friends living in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar, it's early on in his reign, and he's just feeling his power a little bit. He has a dream, and it's so vivid that he really wants the interpretation of it. So he calls, as it says here, his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and his Chaldean wise people. And he says, "I want to know the interpretation of the dream." And they say, "Well, yes, fine, tell us the dream and we'll give you an interpretation." Well, now the king knows very well that if he tells them the dream, they could make up any sort of interpretation. As it says a bit further on, he says, "You could give me misleading and tortuous speeches." He says, "So tell me what the dream was, and I shall know whether you can interpret it or not." Well, it was a tall order and they couldn't do it, obviously. The king, because of course he's used to power and he can have anything he wants, he gets into a great rage and he issues an order, a decree, that all the wise men are to be killed. Now that includes Daniel and his three friends. So Arioch, who is the commander of the king's executioners, goes to find Daniel. But this actually is the first Daniel has heard of this. So he goes to the king. Now that's quite courageous. and he asks for a stay of execution so that he can ask his God for help. And amazingly, the king gives him that. So, was Daniel frightened? Well, yes, of course he was. And how do I know? Because it says in verse 17, Daniel then went home and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, what had happened, urging them to beg the God of heaven to show his mercy in this mysterious affair. Daniel was frightened, obviously. Life was very precarious in those days. But he went to the right place for help. And during the night, the Lord gave Daniel the dream and the interpretation. So the next morning early, I'm sure it was early, Daniel went to see Arioch, and he said to him, look, please don't kill the wise men. I've got the dream and the interpretation. Arioch agrees not to do it. So by going to the Lord for help, Daniel saved not only his own life, but the lives of his 3 friends and the lives of all these wise men. Now, as for the dream and its interpretation, I'll have to leave that for next time. But just to point out that if I'm right about Daniel 11:40, and I might not be, then things are going to get a little bit scary. But if we go to the right place for help, we will be absolutely fine. So all thanks go to our dear Father and Jesus our Lord. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless you all.